And we're streaming. We are streaming. Hello, everyone. We're trying to get this thing together. If you're watching this in the replay, you can fast forward about 8.5 minutes. Somewhere in there. And let's let the chat room know that we are live. And we are live. Okay. Okay, it's all coming together. Oh, we need a presentation. Let's do a presentation. Let's do that presentation. Does that work? Yes. All right. Camera check. Camera check, everyone. Camera check. Places, everyone. Places. All right. How about the lower third there? It's actually correct this time. Good. See, it all works, and we're recording. See, you got recording going right down there. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the chat room. Welcome to anyone else watching on the YouTube side. If you are watching on the YouTube side, there's a real-time chat and a question place where you can answer questions on professormesser.com/live. And that's a good place to go if you want to just interactively talk with me, like Jeff K, who says he's looking forward to this great show. You're welcome. You're putting a little bit of a cart before a horse because you define this as a great show. You're looking forward to this great show. And I think you're a little premature. We shall indeed find out. It'll be great. In fact, I have the Q&A that we're going to do for the first hour, and then I have a little story about a network outage. Just a short little story of a network outage. And it was a good one. And I'm in good shape here. The desk doesn't look too messy. There's a lot of stuff behind this that you don't see. In fact, you can kind of see behind me back here, behind the monitors, there's stuff. I got boxes back there. There's a table. I'm putting together a new server. So I've got a bunch of stuff back there. In fact, I was going to have it all done yesterday, and I'm putting in a rack mount server. So it's a box that's 4U high, 4 units high. I got it really high. I was going to get like 3U. So all I really needed to do was fit a full-size card, and I really didn't want to put a riser board in. I just wanted it to be straight up. But I got a heatsink, a CPU cooler, heatsink and fan that was too big to go in a 4U high system. That's how big it was. It's one of these monster systems. It was what was it? We go to, I forget the name of it. Now we gotta find what the thing was that here everybody gets to see my Amazon that I ordered. It was a Be Quiet Dark Rock Pro 3 is what I had originally purchased. In fact, there it is. And, it doesn't look too big from here. It's massive. It is big. It's a big cooler. It's just huge. It looks like really tiny. No, it's enormous. It was too big. And I've used these before in other systems, and it fit great. But unfortunately, this was just like a millimeter too high. It was just too high. It was too darn high. So I got a different flavor of the Be Quiet cooler models. These are expensive coolers. CPU coolers generally cost like $20 and $30, and this is, $100. This is actually, they're already out. I got it yesterday when they were in stock, so it was actually a good price. But this one's kind of much flatter. You can see it's pointing up instead of the side. Anyway, that's what I'm doing. That's why I've been working. Yeah, I was thinking water cooling actually is not a bad idea. This will be a unit that will be constantly streaming 24/7, the server. And I did consider water cooling, but it doesn't need it. It's going to be in a cooled environment. The CPU is not going to be that crazy. I'm not overclocking. Air cooling would work just fine. So I went with the least possible problems associated with this. One of the challenges I have, and one of the reasons I consider water cooling, is it'll be in this room. Not in this room, but next to this room where my data center is, which is a 19-inch rack that's in what effectively is a very large closet that I built specifically for this. It's air conditioned. There's ventilation. I have a heat switch. If it gets too warm in there, it starts blowing the warm air out and pulling the cool air in. So the heat's obviously an issue. The cooling is obviously an issue because of the noise. I just want it to be very quiet. So I did consider water cooling just because water cooling is so darn quiet. And if this doesn't work out, I might consider doing that. But I've used the Be Quiet series of CPU coolers before, and they're just silent. And they're awesome. They're huge fans. So they're pulling a lot of air very quietly, and they seem to work just fine. So, but it's one of those things. You gotta be ready for it. Let's get our Socrative going here. 5.4 gigahertz. This will be one of the, I think this is an H170 chipset, and I'm running a 4 gigahertz processor. So I just needed to do this one thing, and I think I've built it too big for that one thing. But the idea is to have something I can use later. That, and there was a dog that walked through my house, or not through my house, but through my yard earlier today, that had come from a different development. So I spent part of the morning rounding up that creature, calling the owner, going over to their house and meeting them, sticking the dog in the truck, and off we went. It was a big chocolate lab, just a big thing. On Socrative, the channel, the room name is Professor Messer, all one word, ProfessorMesser. Socrative.com. Room name, Professor Messer. There we go. Some textbooks, the bird watching, this streaming system is for the birds. It's for the bird streaming system, which is working phenomenally. Very happy. Some books for the Network Plus exam show. What are we on time? Got a minute. 172.17.01, the same as 172.17.1.1 is the same iPhone address. I don't know what you're talking about. You'll need to maybe take a picture and send it to me. See, now I made the mistake of watching, I got into a YouTube Broadway tunes hole. I know. And now I have In the Heights in my head. Opening theme. Oh, don't talk to me about the Pokemon Go. It's a big thing in our house. It's all over. We are all about it. It is hot in here. Let's turn this air conditioning down the next 10 seconds and get started, shall we? Okay, we're ready. 12 noon on my side. You're a few seconds behind, but that's okay. You will be joining me shortly. See you on the other side. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the July 2016 Professor Messer Network Plus Study Group. This is my monthly live study group where I ask you questions and you answer interactively online, and we see how we do. It is, I'm going to rename it Study Group Go. I think that's the only appropriate marketing thing to do at this point. We'll wander around with our iPhones and our Android devices trying to answer Network Plus questions, which effectively is exactly what we're going to do for this first hour. In the second hour, I really open up the phone lines. It's an open call-in. You can call in about Network Plus questions. You can ask questions in the chat room. I have a little story of a network outage that occurred this week, so I'll talk about that in the second hour, and we can talk about a lot of other things. We usually chat a bit before the live event occurs. These live events occur, by the way, once a month. So you can join us once a month for Network Plus. If you're studying for A Plus and Security Plus, we always do once a month study groups for those as well. There's a lot going on here. We've got a lot of projects going on right now. But if you ever want to know what is going on, what's happening these days, I'm always doing something. I on the internet to let you know, either on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. I try to keep things going there. I need to Instagram something today. But if you ever want to find me, you type in professormesser.com/Twitter/Facebook/Instagram/Google+/ one of those things. And you'll be able to do that. There is, by the way, I want to thank people for their ongoing support as well. For those of you that are familiar with all of the things that we do here, I make this Network Plus video-based training course, and I put every minute of the training course available to watch for free online. There is nothing that's hidden behind a paywall. There's no abridged version that I put online. I put every minute of it online, so you can watch the entire thing for free just by going to professormesser.com. There is also an offline version of this. So sometimes people want to be able to take this with them. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go to professormesser.com/getnetplus, and you can see our 1080p full HD videos are available. People tell me all the time, I'm watching it on my PlayStation, I'm watching it on my television. It's a nice thing to do and have it right there on the big screen. You can really see it. This also includes MP3 files, or you can purchase the MP3 files separately. And of course, my course notes, which we'll talk about later today as well. Well, for those of you that have joined us before, you're familiar with this Q&A process. It's interactive. I don't just ask questions and you figure it out on your side. You vote online, and I get to see a summary of what everybody is doing during that voting process. So if you haven't done this before, you pop open a new browser window, or you can load one of the apps that's on a mobile device for Socrative. You want the Socrative Student app. And if you go to Socrative.com, you want to click on the student login. You'll be able to get to that page, and it asks you for a room. You're going to need to go to room Professor Messer. Make sure you spell it right, or you won't be able to get into the room. Or nobody will be in the room. You'll wonder, you'll be sitting in a room all by yourself. So the room name, Professor Messer, ProfessorMesser. This will be the first real test for today's Q&A. Can you get into the room? So if you can get into the room, you're doing well. I have a hard time typing my name sometimes. So try it a couple of times. You'll get in there. And if you do, you will see a question that's already there waiting for you. I've already put up the first one. This will be our trial balloon. We're going to see how we do. How long have you been studying for your Network Plus certification? And when you get in there, you'll be able to choose A, B, C, D, E, or F. You can see A is less than 3 months, B is 3 to 6 months, 6 to 9 months, 9 months to a year, over a year, or I already have my Network Plus certification, which is useful because sometime during this first hour, I will give you a special code word that you can use to get 1 hour of continuing education units, which is good whether you are getting CEUs for your A+, your Network Plus, Security Plus. This will count really for all three of those. So that's something you can work on doing. You can see, in fact, we have 60s, almost 70% plus of you have been doing this for less than 6 months, and 57, more than half of you right now, less than 3 months. So this is a really good time to get into learning about the A+ pieces. I'm going to ask you a number of questions today, and we'll see how you do as we step through these. All you have to do is leave your phone or your browser on this same screen, and I will cycle you through the questions. You don't have to go to any other pages. It's really simple and easy to do. So thanks for joining us on there. Yes, the chat room is here and asking questions and talking about these things and asking about the rooms themselves, and it is indeed the Network Plus study group that we're on. You know that because I want you to get the Network Plus exam objectives. If you have not downloaded these objectives, you should do this before you do any more studying. Maybe after we're done here, make sure you go and download the objectives. This was a version, this exam, the Network Plus version is the N10006. If you have study materials that say anything but N10006, you need to upgrade those study materials and only study from N10006. That's important. This version of the exam was released last year in February of 2015, and we expect there will probably be an update 3 years from that date, which makes it about February of 2018. So if you are studying right now for the N10006, this is the latest version. You're not going to worry about hitting a deadline. You got plenty of time to study for your exam. So with that, let's do some studying for our exam. Let's see what we can learn about Network Plus. And the first question, actually, interestingly enough, not much about networking. This one's more about power. And the question is, which of these best describes a power inverter? Let's see how we can do with this one. This is a multiple choice question, so this is one that's important to know. Whenever you start working in data centers with electronics equipment, with other types of technologies that deal with power, you're going to be pulled into the power side of things. So this is an important question to know about. I do have a number of options for you, though. So the options are what best describes a power converter? Convert from AC to DC power. Or does it convert from a higher voltage to lower? Does it convert from DC to AC power? Does it convert I didn't even spell it correctly. See, now you caught me. Convert from lower voltage to higher and provide continuous power during an outage. So spelling errors aside, I think you know where I was going with this. So maybe one of these will jog your memory as to what a power inverter is. This is not just a name that's thrown out there. A power inverter has a very specific purpose, and you should know that specific purpose for your Network Plus exam. Power inverters, you'll run into them all the time. So if you think you know the answer, go to Socrative.com and click the student login and go to room name Professor Messer. Put it right here on the screen, right down there. Where is it? Right down there is Professor Messer, Professormesser. I think most of you are getting in there and are able to do that right now. This is one, I always forget which one of these it is. A power inverter, because there's so many different devices that deal with power. So stop Googling power inverter. I can see you. I can hear you. I can feel you doing the Googling. Don't Google. During this entire process, you should just take a stab at it as if you're sitting down to the exam and you're going to try to answer this straight away without any other input or questions. It's right off the top of your head. There is only one answer for inverter. The chat room's saying, you only want one answer? Well, there's only one answer. There is only one answer. So in fact, the other chat room's like, yeah, there's only one. So let's see how we did with power inverter. And you can see we're a little torn. I think we got kind of a tie for first, converting from AC to DC power or converting from DC to AC power. Only 11% said convert from a higher voltage to lower, and we got single digits for converting from lower voltage to higher or providing continuous power during an outage. Well, so which one is it? Which one could this possibly be between all of these different things? Let's talk about power converters and power inverters. These are very specific terms, very specific names that we would use. A power converter is generally something that converts from AC power to DC power. It's that direction. You are converting this into that DC piece. Very common to use power converters for the devices that we're using for our laptops, for our desktop systems, and even if you have one of these inverting systems, you need to be able to plug in and convert what's coming from your wall jack and AC and get it into the DC power that your devices need on the inside. So your routers, your switches, your firewalls, your other network components are going to be using a number of different power converters. A power inverter is very similar to this device right down here that is converting really or inverting from DC to AC power. So you've got some DC power that you're using somehow, very much like this particular device that's taking a DC power from a jack that's perhaps inside your car. It's a very good example of that. And it's providing you with AC power that you can use to plug in other devices. So if you need some other type of power connection inside of a vehicle, you can use a properly sized ones of these power inverters. Power inverters are also seen very often and more often these days on solar panels. So if you're putting up solar panels on your house, it's going to pull in the power. It's going to create DC power, but of course your house needs AC power. So it will be inverting that over to AC power. We also commonly see this on emergency power as well. So let's go back. We want power inverters where we're going from DC to AC. So if you answered C, convert from DC power to AC power, those 34% of you got that one absolutely right. So well done with that one. It's a good place to go if you're ever trying to figure out these pieces of what really is going on. That's what you need to know. So make sure you know the difference between an inverter and a converter. It really makes a big difference when you're working through all of those different components and trying to figure out what are we trying to do with power and how we're trying to use it. Make sure you are definitely familiar with all of those pieces. Let's go to another question. I think that was a good way to start with these and get them going. Folks in the chat room are saying, hey, I'm having a problem with video and with that. Everything looks great on this side. Just so you're aware, if you're having problems, it probably is something on the other side with YouTube or with your connection into YouTube. Because I just looked at the stats and we are doing 100% here. We're looking really great. Let's do another question though. I threw out this strange term about power inverters right away. Well, I've got another strange term for you. So here we go. Which of the following are commonly used during Slack? It's not really Slack. It's SLAAC. We just call it Slack because that's much easier to say. The Slack is a thing. So which of the following are most commonly used during Slack? There's only one particular answer. Don't Google Slack. Don't do that. Don't answer the chat room. Instead, you should answer one of these. Is it RDP, NDP, NAT, IPsec, SNMP? Boy, there's a lot of those. It's a lot of different terms I just kind of stuck on here. So this is one of the things you're going to see a lot on the exam is they will ask you a question, but there will tend to be multiple steps to get to the final answer. And this is one of those. You not only need to know what Slack is, you need to know what all these other terms are as well. So hopefully you can figure out that piece and determine which one of these is it really associated with. Again, don't try to get in there and modify or search through what Google might tell you. Don't do any type of Googling. Take this cold as if you were sitting for the exam and see if you're able to do that. Which of the following are most commonly used during Slack? If you think you know the answer, go to Socrative.com, go to the room name Professor Messer, and you'll be able to answer this one too. I think this is another one where it's another term that we don't hear very often, but certainly pretty important. Don't Google use my book. Well, I don't have a book, so that makes it easy. I didn't write a Network Plus book, so you wouldn't be using my book, but you're welcome to use a book, just not during the exam. And probably not a good idea to do it here. Just try to figure it out. So if you don't know, definitely try to figure out what you know it may not be, and at least take a educated guess at what you think the answer could possibly be. I think that would be a good way to step through these. Yes, chat room, I do see the messages. I'm watching them all go by, and I'm actually talking about these. For those, there are some folks in the chat room that say they're having problems with video. I checked on this side. Video is beautiful. So if you're having problems, it's something relating to your connection off to YouTube, which is what we're using. And this is one of the things, the Slack piece is something that would be very useful to know about, especially on the networking side. This is a network certification. You're going to run into these and work through these pieces. Let's see how we're doing with this answer. Let's have a look at how we've done so far. And you can see we are all over the place. Well, we're tied for first, 28%, NAT and IPsec. We've got kind of a second place would be SNMP. Third, we can say NDP, and maybe fourth place might be RDP. So we've got a weird thing going on there. What could these possibly be? What types of things do we commonly see using this Slack? So let's see what the possible answers are with this. We know that those are the things, but Slack is something you would commonly see associated with network discovery protocol or neighbor discovery protocol. This is IP6 networking. So this is where you really want to look at finding the neighbors, finding the other devices that are in your particular network. Slack is the stateless address auto configuration. This is how IPv6 is able to give you an IP address on the network that is able to route and communicate out to the world without actually having a DHCP server. It's something that's very commonly used if you don't have a DHCP server in a particular area. So this is a place where if you're trying to figure out pieces associated with how am I going to get these devices running on this network with no infrastructure in place, this might be something in use. There might be a use to have this. If you just don't have a DHCP server, you got a small site, this is a way to get up and running and have it work properly. So this uses also something called duplicate address detection, or DAD, to make sure there are no duplicate IP addresses. Because if you don't have a DHCP server that's handing out addresses, you need some way to make sure that you're not going to get an overlap, that you're not going to get a duplicate of those. So that would be a very good way to do this. So then the neighbor discovery protocol is the one that you might use. So if we look at how we did NDP, only 14% recognize that term. This is something that's relatively new in this version of the Network Plus exam. Previous versions of Network Plus kind of touched on IPv6, but they didn't really go deeper into the intricacies and the protocols used during an IPv6 network configuration. Now they are. So make sure that you understand the IPv6 and all of the other pieces that are expected on the exam. The best place to go is your exam objectives, because that's exactly where these questions are coming from. Well, now I've got to fill in the blank for you. I've got another question for you, and here is the fill in the blank. And the question is, what connector is this? I'm asking very specifically for the connector, not the cable. So this is one where you're going to answer by filling in all of these different pieces, and I'm going to show you a bigger piece of this connector. You can also see it online. Here it is. There's a big piece. There you go. You can really see that connector. What connector is this? This is something you will absolutely run into when you're doing networking, so you should absolutely know what the name of this connector happens to be. If you think you know, make sure I go back. You can go to Socrative.com to the room named Professor Messer. I'm going to kind of look through these. Some of you are telling me what type of cable it is. I don't care what kind of cable it is. I care about what kind of connector it is. There is no such thing as that British naval connector, by the way. There is no such thing as that. All the folks in the UK, they were told that's what it was. And this is, by the way, not, I'll give you a hint. It's not a BNC connector. A lot of you are saying that. I like the answer, Fandangle Bobberoonie. It is not a Fandangle Bobberoonie. I think we should call it a Fandangle Bobberoonie, though. That's my new name for it. It is not a potato. I'm looking through these. So I'm going through this list that you are sending me. So far, these are not bad. Most of you know what this is. Most of you did pretty well with this particular answer and what connectors these are. This is one where whenever you start getting into these, also, by the way, make sure you do not mention what the answer might be in the chat room, or unfortunately you get kind of muted there. Yeah, a lot of people, this is not a BNC connector, so there's a little hint for you. And a BNC connector is not a British nautical connector or a British naval connector. That's not what a BNC is. So I hate that they tell you that, though. It's sort of one of those things, those terms that through the years, people have called it that, thinking that's what it is. They posted that that's what it is. And so other people see the post and decide that's what it should be. But it is not. This is an F connector. You commonly see these F connectors on things like television. That's where we first were really introduced to these, at least in the United States, was with these television connections. They were bringing us analog cable TV back when we were rolling out cable television. But of course, we've been able to take these links, since we've got all of this copper going into everyone's house, why not perform some networks over it? So of course, all of our video that we're doing today on these cable networks is all through digital connections. It's all IP addresses. It's all multicasts. It's all done with digital connections. So the RG6 type of cable or RG type of coax cable will very often connect with these F connectors on the end to plug into a cable modem, which is, of course, one of the most popular ways that people get internet, at least in the United States. That's the case. These cable modem connectors are extremely common. We very often need to find these F connections and cables so that we can plug in these in our small office or home office. A lot of businesses are using these. So make sure that you take advantage of knowing what these things are as well. Whenever I start looking at what I need to know for the exam, there are a ton of different connectors on the exam. And this is certainly one of those you're going to need. As you're probably aware, there's not just copper connectors on the exam. There are all kinds of connectors on the exam. And you can find out a lot of those connectors in my course notes. What I did was take every single one of my videos. I pretty much wrote down everything important on every single one of these videos, and I made them available right here on this list of course notes. I kind of tried to put everything in there. So it's got subnetting, there's all the protocols, there's all the connectors, there's all of the diagrams. In fact, this is every page of my course notes right here on the screen. You kind of see a summary of everything I've listed there. I think I've got a copy of it. There's the course notes. So here's the course notes, everything I tried to put in here. I'm just going to scroll very quickly through. Let's get to the connectors. So here's the connectors with the different cables. I've got connector types here for the RG6 and the other types for the copper and the fiber. They're all here. Everything's listed in these course notes. Another nice thing about these course notes is every dollar of this comes back to keep the website running. I've obviously got a lot of people watching videos these days. This is one where it's very useful to, very nice, and I definitely appreciate all of your support that you have. This is very useful, and I like to be able to give you something back. If you want to help support the site, I think you should get something for that. So this is course notes was my way to do that for you. So I want to appreciate all of the support that you're giving. Thanks for your purchase and consideration of the course notes. And a lot of people in the chat room say thanks for the course notes, worth the cost, worth the money. I want to thank you for your ongoing support and for your nice words about those. Helps keep everything running here and make sure that the lights stay on here at Messer Studios. Let's do another question. Let's get to another one that's here. This one dealing with a very specific parameter. I think it's parameter. What is that? A specific term, I guess would be a better way to put it. And the term is, which of these would best describe good put? Good put. Good put. Good put. What is good put? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here's the possible answers. Is it the response time when no network errors are occurring? Is it a measurement of application data transfer? Is it a ratio of download speed to upload speed? Is it the response time of a server under stress testing? Or is it the time to complete a file download? Which of these would best describe good put? Now, this is a very common thing that's used on the exam, which is where they ask, which is the best answer? Which would best describe what I'm talking about right here? That is the place you need to really think about on these exams, because they will very often give you a lot of different answers. Many of the answers they provide could be an answer, but only one of them is going to be the best answer. So you really need to know what that is going to be so that you can then work through those pieces. So the question here, which of these would best describe good put? You need to be able to answer this as well. If you think you know the answer, don't answer in the chat room. Don't Google it. You should instead go to Socrative.com, click the student login, and go to the room Professor Messer. You'll be able to answer what these happen to be. I'm going to take a sneak peek, in fact, off to the side and see how folks are doing. My goal when I ask these questions, by the way, it's an interesting balancing act. I'm trying to make it as difficult as possible, but not too hard, because I want people to get the answer right. So I'm trying to get about half of you to know what this is, and then the other half of you to kind of wonder what it is that we've been stepping through. So hopefully you can go through these pieces as well as what would best describe good put. So let's see how we're doing so far with the answers on these. Let's flip over, and we're all over the place again. Well, about 40% of us say it's a measurement of application data transfer. I'll put that as number one on the list. Number two is response time when no network errors are occurring. And about a quarter of you said the ratio of download speed to upload speed. And then single digits, nobody thinks it's a response time of a server under stress testing, and practically no one thinks that it's the time to complete a file download. So what is good put? It's interesting. I didn't actually put the good put slides on my other response here. So let's find these good put slides. I'm going to show them to you. I didn't put the answer in my notes that I have in front of me, and I want you to see the answer when we go through these. It's sort of a multiple steps that I go through whenever I'm working through all of the different pieces of this, because I want to be able to give you a question. I want to be able to show you the answers to the questions. It is sometimes a slide doesn't make it in there. So let me quickly pull up the slide piece in here and show it to you. We're going to see if the The beauty of searching on my computer is going to be able to provide me. Oh no, it did find. I think it did provide me with the right information. Let's have a look at it. So good put is something you would commonly see associated. I'm going to flip through all of these. This is in the wireless connection slide deck because it deals specifically with how much data an application can transfer. This is obviously important. Doesn't really matter whether it's wireless or wired. You want to be able to do this all the time. You want to be able to always know what the response times and how much information you're going to be able to transfer through an application. But when you move from a wired network to a wireless, especially when there are multiple people on that wireless network, there may be other considerations you need to take into account that could affect the overall performance of an application. So instead of talking about network response time or network throughput, we're really most concerned about what the end user is experiencing. And this is almost always going to be the ultimate determination of how well an application is performing is what is the end user's experience. It doesn't matter how fast your network is. It doesn't matter how fast your servers are. It's what the end user sees on their screen. And how much data an application can transfer is, I wouldn't say commonly called good put because it's not a term we often use across the board, but it is one that we can use to describe how an application is performing. And you might want to compare that to something like throughput, which is very commonly used for network communication, where we're talking about how fast the network is performing. But for those of you that have been doing things on the network, you know the performance of the network doesn't necessarily translate to the performance of the application. So it's nice to have a set of statistics that's very application centric. And that's when we would use good put. So those of you that did answer a measurement of application data transfer, 43%, almost hit that 50% mark. It got that one absolutely right. It would not be the response time when no network errors occurring. That would be a network response time. Hopefully no errors are ever occurring. So that's really the only time you're really trying to figure that piece out is when everything's running properly. Of course, if you're running into an issue, that's where you'd really look at network response time. A ratio of download speed to upload speed, that is not good put, although that might be a good parameter to use to determine the differences in upload versus download. This is one of those that response time of a server under stress testing and the time to complete a file download are just those things. They are a response time of a server when you're stress testing it and the time to complete a file download. I would imagine response time of a server under stress testing is going to be pretty high. You're not going to have a very good response time for those. So our answer again, if you answered B, a measurement of application data transfer, that would indeed be the best description of what good put is. So very well done with that one. Let's now have a look at the next question. Now we're going to get more into the protocol side of things. Let's see how we're doing with this one. The question here is, which of these would be considered a secure protocol? And I want you to pick every one in here that would apply. I'm not going to tell you how many there are, but there are certainly in this question more than one. That'll be your hint for this. Which of these would be considered a secure protocol? Pick every single one that you think is secure. The possible answers are SSH, SNMP v2, HTTP, Telnet, SNMP v3, FTP. This is one. I'm dealing with this. Which of these would be considered a secure protocol? Pick all of those that would apply with all of those pieces. And maybe you would be able to answer this one as well. Be able to get those. This is one where, especially on today's networks, we are so sensitive to privacy, to security, to keeping our information private. This is one where we need to understand what protocols are in the clear and what we would consider insecure. And we need to know which protocols are not in the clear, that are either encrypted or protected in some way. If you think you know what the answers are, no answering in the chat room. Go to Socrative.com, go to the room name Professor Messer, and you can answer that one. And Richard in the chat room just ordered the Security Plus course notes. Thank you, Richard. Do appreciate that. And Mrs. Professor Messer will thank you as well. Oh, it's a tricky question, isn't it? You could say one. It's more than one. There's your hint. It's more than one of these. So I put in here, I'm not going to tell you how many. I'll just say pick all that apply is not a trick. I'm really asking for more than one. But how many is it? Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it 4? Is it 5? Is it all of them? What is it? I don't know. You're going to have to choose which of these would be a secure protocol. I think most of you know this one. I think most of you got this one. Let's see how we did. Now, obviously, we're not going to get 100% on this. I'm really kind of hoping if we get 2 that are 50%, then everybody got them right. So how did we do? Well, we've got 2 that are kind of really big. We got 39% said SSH, and only a third said SNMP v3. You can see 14% said SNMP v2. And then you've got single digits for FTP, Telnet, and HTTP. I think you folks were pretty good with this one. I think you did pretty well. So let's look at a list of there are many secure protocols out there, but I'm going to give you the list that CompTIA provides you in their exam objectives. And this will be a good set of terms or of protocols to know about. So one is the SSH, Secure Shell, SFTP, which is like an FTP with the S in front of it. If Secure Shell is encrypted shell traffic, Telnet is insecure. Secure FTP, obviously the S is for secure. If regular FTP is one that is insecure. The way SFTP works, I was actually using SSH to encrypt the file transfer. Kind of nice to have that. SNMP v3. That implies it's the third version of SNMP, and that's exactly the case. SNMP version 1 and SNMP version 2 did not provide any type of data protection. There was no encryption built into it. There was no way to know what was going on, or there was no way to protect the data that was going on back and forth between your SNMP workstation and the devices that you were monitoring. SNMP v3 is the version that added that protection, so that would be a secure protocol. TLS, or what we commonly call SSL, but specifically we are talking about transport layer security, which is, you can think of as the upgrade to SSL, is how we protect the HTTP communication back and forth to a web server. So that, of course, would be a secure protocol and a very common secure protocol, especially to connect across a virtual private network, either between sites or from a user to a site, is using a protocol like IPsec, and that is a protocol that can certainly provide security as well as non-repudiation and another number of nice capabilities within that encrypted tunnel. So those are the important secure protocols you should know for your Network Plus certification. And you should absolutely, as you're going through this list of what should I know, what should I concentrate on, those are indeed the things that you should know and that you should concentrate on. So make sure you're absolutely aware of those pieces. So let's see how we did. You can see that the 39% of you that chose SSH got that absolutely correct. That is a secure protocol. And the 33% of you that answered SNMP v3 also chose that as a secure protocol. That is correct as well. So if you chose A and E, those were the 2 secure protocols in this list. SNMP version 2 does not provide any type of encryption or security. HTTP is web traffic in the clear. Clearly not anything associated with security there. Telnet is not in the clear. We would use SSH as our terminal connection instead of something like Telnet. You imagine being in a terminal connection, typing in your password, having your password go completely clear over the network. That's what happens with Telnet, and that's why you want to use SSH. And FTP, the file transfer protocol, will transfer a file through the network. Anyone can collect all of those packets together and rebuild your file. So you don't want that to happen. You want to use SFTP to protect those. So if you answered, again, A and E, you got this one absolutely correct. Well done with that one. There's make sure you know your protocols. Make sure you go through the list and understand all of these protocols. One of the things that you do run into a lot with some of these technologies is that it's difficult to remember all of these. It'd be more useful if you could perform some type of hands-on or have some practical experience in using these protocols. Well, that's where something like the GTS Learning Live Labs step in. GTS Learning has created a series of live labs that you can effectively go online and run a bunch of labs as if they had a bunch of machines and routers and switches in your room. You turn them all on, you connect to them, and you can run through some labs. But instead, they virtualized everything. It's all online. You connect to it through your web browser. You don't have to install any type of additional software. It works fantastic. I have the Live Labs, in fact, running on my screen. Here's the Network Plus Live Labs. I've got understanding network protocols, a bunch of network protocols, DHCP email protocols, understanding another set of protocols. There's SSH, SNMP, Telnet, SMB, understanding how software as a service works, configuring VPN servers. We're using some of these encrypted protocols we were discussing, troubleshooting internet connections, understanding common network vulnerabilities. It goes on and on. This is enormous, which makes sense. The Network Plus exam is an enormous exam. Understanding SNMP. So that's one I chose before. Let's do a new one, understanding cryptography. A lot of people deal with cryptography. So I'm going to click on that. It opens up and gives me a list of devices on the side. I have a domain controller. I'm going to start that up. I've got a Windows 7 machine. I'm just going to select these and power them up. There's a Linux device, another Windows 7 device. The way this is built out is right here on the screen. I know it's difficult to see. My head's in the way, and I've kind of scrunched everything on one screen for you to see. But you can always... I can scroll over with my mouse here and you can kind of see all of the labs are right here. You can even pop open this window onto a separate screen or a separate window if you wanted to. You can go to step 1 and it says, do this. Takes you through install hash calc. We're going to do some hashing and understand how hashing works. So the entire setup is one that is always available because it's online. You don't have to install any software in your computer. It uses all of the modern HTML5 browsers and simply works. It's all remote access, so it's very, very fast. And it's always available because it's always online, and it's very, very quick whenever you're using this. One of the advantages of having this virtualization is that I'm able to build out all of these computers, and they're effectively available and ready. So the domain controller just booted up and it's a Windows machine. Notice it's not an emulator. This is a virtual device. So I could even go off the track of the actual test or the lab that I'm working on and just try a lot of different things. This happens to be Windows Server 2008 R2. So we're doing group policy. It's loading up Windows machines. While that's doing that, we'll go over to the Windows 7 device. Here's my Windows 7 machine. And you can see it's there. I'm running the file manager. You can see how fast it runs. Let's go to the start menu. Let's go to our control panel. Let's change some of the home group and sharing options. It's all here and ready to go. All I have to do is now step through all the different pieces that are here and being able to work through all of the other servers, all of the other Windows devices. Here's a Windows XP machine, and I can just quickly flip between them. It's really brilliant the way they've got this set up. And if you follow my link, you actually get a discount over what you would pay if you went directly to the GTS Learning site. That's the benefit of you watching this study group. So if you want a year's access to these live labs, and also it also includes the GTS Learning book, the ebook with this, and the sample questions that they have with that ebook. So there's so much that is included with that $99. It's quite a deal. Plus you can try it for free. Go to professormesser.com/netlabs. You can scroll down, fill in your information, try it for an hour. See if it works for you. Maybe the live lab works for you. Maybe it doesn't. One way to try is just to give it a shot. They're more than happy to let you try it out for an hour and see if that's something that might work for you. You can see you can easily spend an hour going through just a portion of these pieces. Why not have you give it a shot? And I want to thank the folks at GTS Learning. You can find out more at professormesser.com/netlabs. And you can reconnect to a lab. You can the labs themselves are sitting there all the time. So you can always connect, disconnect. And if you don't like anything that you did, you can completely restart it. It's another thing you can do. Start over from where you were. I completely messed this up. Let's do something else. Let's do another question. Let's get back to the Q&A. Here's one, and another question that seems to want to know something about this term. Where would you expect to find the NIU? Where would I expect to find the NIU? I guess online it actually says where we'd expect to find an NIU, which I guess either one will work with this particular case. Would it be in a router configuration? Would it be in the MDF? Would it be in your QoS settings? Would it be in configuration settings for DHCP snooping, or would it be none of the above? Could be none of the above. I hate those none of the above questions because you really got to know it, don't you? Maybe you know it. And if you do know it, you can go to Socrative.com to the room name Professor Messer. Stop Googling NIU. Just take a stab at it. Just guess at it. Maybe you know it. See if you can figure it out in your head. Which one of these would it be? Where would you expect to find an NIU or the NIU? I guess there could be multiple NIUs, couldn't there? I guess there could. Maybe there's one. Maybe it's an. Maybe it's the. Maybe it's some of them. Only you know. And if you know, go to Socrative.com and answer this one. The Network Plus exam probably has more different and varied abbreviations and acronyms than any of the other CompTIA exams. And it makes sense. The networking side of things has a ton of different acronyms because networking is one of these technologies. It's very unlike something like Windows, where Windows happens. You have Windows XP or Windows 2000 or Windows 7 or Vista. These things are around for really kind of a finite amount of time. And as soon as that operating system is no longer modern, it quickly falls off the map. How many people talk about Windows NT these days or any of the specifics associated with Windows NT? But networking and the networking technologies that we have been around for a very long time. The networking technologies we were using with Windows NT, we're still using today. So we've really just kind of accumulated this huge amount of technologies which all have their own set of acronyms, they all have their own set of protocols, and that's why when you see the differences between one version of the Network Plus exam and they update the Network Plus exam, you might look at it and say, well, they didn't change very much, did they? They just added on things that happened in the last 3 years. They didn't really drop much off the list, and unfortunately, that's just the case. You just need to be able to figure out those pieces because we're just going to keep adding on and adding on and adding on, and we don't seem to get rid of any of those older technologies. Kind of unusual when we lose a networking technology, in fact. So where would we expect to find it in NIU? Well, who knows, really. We aren't quite sure with this one either. Let's see if we can answer the question. 31% of you said it's in a router configuration. Aha, it's in my router. 28% of you said it's in the MDF, whatever that is. 20% of you said none of the above. Some of you are just not trusting me whatsoever. I'm fine with that. 13% said in your configuration settings for DHCP snooping. I did it again, snooping. And 8% said in your QoS settings. So the real question is, which one of these is it? Well, the NIU is something you would commonly describe as the network interface unit. This is kind of the demarcation point. Whenever you're talking about any type of network, you're almost always dealing with a third party that's providing you those network services. So you're dealing with an AT&T, you're dealing with a Comcast, you're dealing with any of the very large wide area network or internet service provider networks that are out there. So the Verizons of the world, the Frontiers of the world, the AT&T, the Sprints, those types of organizations are going to give you a network connection. But there needs to be a line that's drawn where everything on this side of the line is yours and everything on this side of the line is the service providers. And this is an important demarcation point because it helps when determining where the problems are occurring and what you can do. We also often call this demarcation point the network interface unit. There's usually a device or some system that is right there at the end where the network provider is plugging into one side of the NIU and you're plugging into the other side of it. Often it's a very simple box. It doesn't have any power. You're simply plugging the network provider into one side, and you're plugging you into the other side, and that's where the two meet. And obviously anything that's in that box and out is the providers, and anything on the inside is your responsibility. When you get into larger networks and more important networks, you'll often find that the NIU is something like a Smartjack. A Smartjack, as name implies, not just a simple jack in the wall that they're giving you. They're actually giving you a device that is powered, and it's usually in this case that you can't touch. Everything inside of that box belongs to the service provider, and they're really giving you a cable connection that you plug into. It's usually just a simple jack you would connect to. But this allows the wide area network provider to give you a lot of capabilities. Let's say you're having a problem over that WAN link and you're wondering maybe it's something that's happening on the provider side. So you call your network provider and they can talk to the network interface unit. They can talk to the Smartjack and tell the Smartjack, go into a loopback, please. I'm going to try looping back to myself. I'm going to send traffic to that Smartjack and see if I get the traffic back to me. And they can check to see, is the line clean? Is it clear? Is it giving any errors? Let's run the test for 5 minutes. Did we see any errors occur during that 5-minute period? So they can really test the physical level. How well are the wires there? And if they don't get any problems, then they can tell you, I'm not seeing any physical problems on the wide area network. One of the things they can also do is loop back on the inside, allow you to run some loop back tests as well. So these Smartjacks and the network interface units perform not just a logical demarcation that allows you to set responsibilities for the different organizations that are providing the network functions, but in many cases, they also provide additional functionality as well that allow you troubleshooting, management, and other functions from the provider side. So if we're trying to figure out where we would find a network interface unit, let's look at these different pieces. In the MDF, 32% of you, 33% of you that answered MDF then got that one absolutely right, because that is the best place you would go to usually find these components, these pieces that are in the network. The best part about being in a data center is that you can put everything in a single place. And when you're talking about the main distribution facility of your organization, you're really talking about a room that ideally has everything there. That's the M, that's the main part of the room. So very often, all of your WAN connections are coming into the MDF. All of your servers, or at least a big chunk of your servers, may be in the MDF. A lot of your cabling connections and where everything's extending from usually comes back to this one central point. And it's very common to see that on the MDF. The nice part about having this functionality is that this MDF, the 33% of you in the MDF, that's where you're going to put those network interface units. It just makes sense. You wouldn't put them down the street. You wouldn't put them in a different closet. You wouldn't put them by your desk. You put them in a centralized point like the MDF. This obviously has nothing to do with any type of configuration settings, so it would not be in a router configuration. It would not be in quality of service. It would not be a configuration setting for DHCP snooping. And obviously, the MDF is the best place you would expect to find one of these. The intermediate distribution frame, the IDF, is usually a closet external or a room external to the MDF. In fact, you might have one single MDF. Think of a college campus. You might have one central room that's your MDF, and then every other building on campus might have its own IDF. So you would run a set of fibers to all of these different buildings, and then you would have a smaller network infrastructure in those IDFs. So the question in the chat room also, is the network interface unit the same as a CSU-DSU? It is not. Very commonly, these Smartjacks are providing you simply the connection from the network provider. You need at that point some way to convert with your CSU-DSU into a serial connection that your routers would be able to use. And that's where you might find a CSU-DSU is on the inside of the jack. Usually the CSU-DSU is something on the side where the customer is, the customer premise equipment, or the CPE. Those CSU-DSUs are very often also built into our routers and other infrastructure devices. They aren't, you might find them as an individual separate unit. They might be in a rack of units, or they might be integrated into the routers themselves. But the network interface unit is almost always, it really is always a separate device, and on your side, it's connecting into the CSU-DSU. You might want to think of the NIU also as the demarc. That's where your demarcation is occurring. CSU-DSU would be a completely different piece of equipment entirely. So those of you that answered in the MDF got that one absolutely right. It is not none of the above. It is not the other configuration settings that are there. It is a physical thing in this particular case. Comes in handy to have that. We've got more questions. So let's do one. I do have another fill in the blank for you. This one's going to be a hard one. Are you ready? Let's see how we do with this one. The question is, which protocol and port is used for NetBIOS session service? NetBIOS session service. That's difficult to say. First, you have to say it. Then you have to answer. And I'm asking very specifically which protocol and port is used for NetBIOS session service. Make sure that, by the way, you give me both the port and the protocol. I'm asking for both of these, the protocol and the port. It's very specific. In fact, that's a pretty important consideration that you, for all of these protocols that are listed in the CompTIA Network Plus exam objectives, make sure that you know not just the number associated with that protocol, the port number, but make sure you know the protocol associated with it, which, by the way, is just as important. Especially if you're configuring a firewall, for example, you have to know the protocol, you have to know the port. You have to know both of those. and you have to get them right with these. I like the answers you're giving me, though. Some of you guys are doing pretty well. I'm asking for a very specific protocol, the NetBIOS session service. So this would be a very specific. Some of you are saying, I have no idea what you're talking about, which is fine. That's fine if you don't know. This will be your chance to learn, though, about the NetBIOS session service. What would we do even with a NetBIOS session service? What will we even run into with these pieces and knowing what they are? Some of you are doing pretty well with this one. Some of you are going very broad with this. I don't need broad. I need a very specific protocol and a very specific port with these. Some of you did know this stuff pretty well in working with these. Some part of the answer is in the question itself. There's a little hint for you. Part of the answer is in the question itself. Which protocol and port is used for NetBIOS session service? I bet some of you know. I bet some of you got these. Some of you do know because I'm looking at the answers on my other screen that you can't see. In fact, what I see on mine is I'm showing you what's on this screen here, and I'm watching your answers here, and I'm looking at the chat room here. That's the juggling act that's going on right now. So that's why I'm watching your answers in front of me. I guess to my left as you're looking at this and watching the chat to my right, and the answers that you have going on. Let's learn about NetBIOS session service. When you're dealing with Windows, and we're all dealing with Windows, especially on a network, there are, I don't know, a million protocols that Windows uses. It seems that way anyway. Windows uses a lot of different protocols in a lot of different ways. They effectively built their own way to communicate on the network that's very specific to the Windows operating system. And the Windows operating system is one that keeps evolving and changing. The protocols keep being updated. It is a constant change with this, but there are a number of protocols that you will always commonly see on a Microsoft Windows network. 3 of those are listed here. These are really kind of the basics of a Windows network. NetBIOS is the underlying, or really, in this case, an encapsulated protocol because we're not using just raw NetBIOS on our networks. Before there was TCP/IP, back in the day, as they say, I remember those days, we didn't have TCP/IP to communicate. We used IPX, was a very common layer 3 protocol we communicated with over Novell networks. But then we had this Microsoft, what they called at the time LAN Manager. That was their server product. And they had to come up with a way for LAN Manager to talk to these other devices that were on the network. And they used a very common protocol at the time, NetBIOS. NetBIOS, unfortunately, not routable. So on your network, it was a very large bridge network that you were using, was the only way to use this NetBIOS protocol. But the fundamentals of NetBIOS we took, and when TCP/IP became popular, Microsoft simply took that NetBIOS communication and encapsulated it within TCP/IP. So we're now, of course, able to use Windows across these very large routed networks. But inside TCP/IP, you're going to find some of these NetBIOS pieces here as well. It becomes really handy to be able to work through those. Whenever I start looking at the NetBIOS terms, make sure you understand them in those terms and how Windows uses them. So for Windows, there are 3 primary NetBIOS functions that you will find being sent over TCP/IP. One of those is the NetBIOS name service. Now, just like you have DNS, in fact, most of what you're going to find these days on a Windows network is primarily DNS, and that's how Windows is doing its name services. You'll find some older Windows devices using the protocol UDP with port 137 using what's called the NetBIOS name service to find these services that are out there. These days, practically everything on a Windows network is using DNS. So you're going to see primarily DNS for name services, but you will still see some of these older devices. So keep that in mind. That's why it's obviously listed in the CompTIA exam objectives. Another NetBIOS related protocol you will find in Windows is UDP 138, the NetBIOS datagram service, and NetBIOS 139, which is the NetBIOS session service. These are 2 protocols that are used to transfer data. So they effectively do exactly the same thing. They're transferring data between point A and point B. NetBIOS UDP 138, the datagram service, is sending this, as you can see, over UDP. It's a connectionless communication. So it's one that doesn't require any acknowledgments to the data that's being sent, which is very different, obviously, than the NetBIOS session service, which is still sending data back and forth, but it's using TCP to be able to do this. And you can see that in the question I asked of you, I wanted to know which protocol and port is used for the NetBIOS session service. And that was the hint that is in the answer itself, is that if there is a session that's being built, then you might assume, or at least it would give you a hint, that perhaps TCP is in use. So when I asked you to provide me with the protocol and the port, the protocol would absolutely be TCP. The port number would be 139. So if you answered this particular question, TCP 139, you got that one absolutely correct. Well done with that. There's a lot of details to go through with these protocols. They are all listed in the CompTIA exam objectives. If you're ever wondering, if you go on the internet and look, you'll see just pages and pages of well-known port numbers and protocols. Someone even pasted just a wall of port numbers and things into the chat room that I had to delete. You don't need to know all of those for your exam. If you're ever wondering what you need to know for your exam, you really should go straight to the source. Don't ever wonder if you need to know something for your certification exam. You should instead go straight to the exam objectives. And the reason is that the exam objectives have everything on them. These are the exam objectives. They go into specific detail, more than any other certification exam provider you will find. Microsoft doesn't give you this level of detail. Cisco doesn't give you this level of detail. VMware doesn't give you this level of detail. Practically no one else gives you this level of detail. And I get questions all the time of me saying, what do I need to know for my exam? And this tells you everything. It gives you the very specific set of port numbers that you would need. It tells you exactly the terms you need to know. It tells you everything. In fact, I can bring up the list of those on mine. I'm going to find the latest version real quick. N10006 is what we want to look at. The best way to find the exam objectives, well, there's a couple ways to do it. One of the ways to do it is you can go to professormesser.com/objectives, or you can simply go to the Google machine and type in CompTIA exam objectives. It'll take you there as well. This is one where the objectives themselves, I'm going to scroll down a bit through all of the objectives. For example, network architecture. It'd be good to find the ports, though. Let's find those ports, since we were just doing port numbers, and folks were really concerned that they needed to know walls and pages of port numbers. It is not the case. You can see, look at the detail that's in here, by the way, as we're scrolling through all of these. Just the level of information associated with this piece is remarkable, and having it there. Let's find, I'm not even reading now on my screen. Let's do NetBIOS. Let's just hunt. There they are. So section 5.9, compare and contrast the following ports and protocols. They tell you exactly what you need to know. So you need to know 80, 443, 137 to 139, 110, 143. There they are. So if you ever wondered, I've actually had people in the chat room say there is a massive amount of information that I need to know for port numbers. I spent days memorizing hundreds of port numbers. I thought, well, you needed to know about 12 or 14. You need to know this many. CompTIA can certainly ask you questions that are not in the exam objectives. In fact, they will tell you in the objectives very clearly that this list is in bulleted format, is not an exhaustive list. We can ask you anything. But what we found is that they really stick to this list. They stick very closely to this list, and you will find me saying over and over and over again that if you know everything that's in this list of exam objectives, you will easily pass your exam. There's just no question about it. If you know everything that's here, you're ready. So use this as a checklist. Make this as your first stop before you start studying. Go through this list, read it, understand. You won't understand half of these things. That's okay, but you'll at least become familiar with them. And then you start using it as your checklist. A lot of books don't follow the same format as this list, and that's fine. In fact, it's probably better from a learning perspective that the book follows a more logical form. But every book is going to cross-tabulate back to what these exam objectives are. It will tell you you need to go section 3.1, and we're going to talk about single point of failure. That might be in chapter 2, but it really is talking about the example 3.1. Know this list. If you know this list, you'll pass your exam. It really is that easy. Make sure you absolutely go through those pieces and know all about them. I do one of these study groups once a month for Network Plus. There's also A Plus study groups. There are Security Plus study groups I do. Everything that is in the study groups, every time we do a study group, they're all in the calendar. So if you ever wanted to find out, if you're watching this on a replay and it's months later, you can always find out when the latest one is. If you're watching live, our next one will be on August the 10th. But if you ever need to know, go to professormesser.com/calendar, and that will tell you everything you need to know about when the next study group might be. There is so much more that we do all the time here. The chat room is always available on the website. There's always professormesser.com/Twitter. I do a weekly Network Plus pop quiz question. Make sure you go to the website and sign up for that. Just goes right into your email. You can also find it on Twitter. They usually come out on a Tuesday, so you might want to go back to yesterday and have a look at what yesterday's Network Plus pop quiz happened to be. The course notes, don't forget about the course notes if you want to help support the website, or you just need a great set of notes before going into your exam. Check out professormesser.com/NPCN, Network Plus course notes. See what I did there? There's a little bit more there. I want to also thank GTS Learning. And don't forget about your free hour of live labs. You can try it out yourself at professormesser.com/netlabs. And of course, join us every month. I love doing these. I like that you're here. We get to do these questions together. If you are here and watching live, feel free to stick around for the after show, which will also be recorded. Maybe if you're watching this on replay, you can also do this as well. Don't forget about the monthly question of the question that I give every month. You need to send me a continuing education unit. I haven't given you the continuing education unit. And the one for this month, let's come up with a good one. I usually make these up off the top of my head. Since we were just talking about the intricacies of the NetBIOS session service, I think that would be a good one to use. So our continuing education code word this month is NetBIOS. And what you need to do to get this continuing education unit is to go to the top or the bottom of the professormesser.com website. There's a contact us link either at the top or the bottom. You can click that. And by clicking that, make sure you give me your name, your email address. Tell me that this is the July 2016 Network Plus study group, and the super secret code word is NetBIOS. And that will get you all the way through those different pieces. If you're watching live, stick around for the live Q&A, and I'll open up the phone lines. If you have to leave us, I can understand that as well. I want to thank you for joining us. We will see you next month on the Network Plus study group. Thanks, everyone. Don't have music. There's nothing that leads you out of this. And although that seems odd, welcome to the after show, everyone. And although that seems odd, you would be surprised how much I have been able to avoid, how many problems I've avoided by having no music whatsoever on any of my pieces. I read these stories all the time because we're getting a lot of views on YouTube, and I see a lot of other people that get a lot of views on YouTube, and they've got music and there's copyright problems, or there's problems with Germany, and there's problems with Germany. How many times we have to go through any of that? But now it's the after show. If you have a question, you can absolutely ask me a question in the chat room. And I have some things to tell you about. I'm going to get the phone lines started up, and then I've got some things, questions have already come in, and I've got a little story of some of the things I was doing. So let's get our call-ins going so that you can call in. You can see there's no staff here. I get to do this myself. This is how this works. Let's start the show there. Let me turn this down and connect to the show, and then I'll give you a phone line you can use to, I got to be able to type Skype properly. There we go. Now I connect in. One moment, everyone. Take a breath. Grab some coffee. Relax. Where is Skype? There he is right there. Boy, the response time on Skype is, that's fantastic. Can we get you to call in there? Beep, 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 beep. And welcome.
Thank you for calling.
You're welcome. What do I do first? I do this, and I type that.
Enter your 6 digits.
I will do that. We'll do this. Click, 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 and welcome. Okay. Now we've got phone lines open. There we go. Get that piece going there. There is, before we get into this, someone in the chat room, since we were talking about the Network Plus there at the end. No, I don't need royalty music. It doesn't matter if the music, by the way, that you use in your YouTube videos is royalty free. If it's music that you purchase, that you are fully licensed to use, doesn't matter. It does not matter. You can make it yourself. If there is music of any kind in your video, you will have a problem. It's really that simple. And I've just been able to avoid any of those problems. So that's it. I've got my own music I made. I got skills. I got musical skills. And no, I'm not going to use it. So that's it. The Network Plus Pop Quiz is a weekly pop quiz on the Tuesday. Weekly pop quiz. It is not a daily pop quiz. Because I just can't write that much content. I was spending all of my days writing content instead of doing new stuff and pop quizzes. So, yeah, it's too bad. So sad. It's just the way it is. There's just too much to do. I can't get all of those doing. Let's, in the chat room, before, just as we were finishing up, someone was asking a very common question. So I'll answer that one first. And it is the question dealt primarily with the Network Plus exam, and they were talking specifically about the Cisco CCNA, I think it was. If I scroll back, scroll, was it the CCNA? It was a Cisco exam. They didn't say. They just said the Cisco cert. Well, Cisco has a bunch of certifications. They have a very comprehensive certification list. The pop quiz sign up on the main page. If you go to professormesser.com, the right sidebar, there's a big picture of an envelope. How hip is that? The Cisco has a very comprehensive set of certifications. If you had to compare something that was the closest certification exam to what Cisco is doing to the Network Plus, I guess you could possibly compare the Network Plus to the CCENT exam, but these are two very different exams. You really can't compare them. They are definitely apples and oranges. Network Plus is an introductory certification that gives you the basics of what you need to know to understand how networks operate. The CCENT is a Cisco-specific exam that deals not only with a number of the topics and things you need to learn for your Network Plus exam, it goes very deep into configuration settings of switches, of routers, of routing protocols, of switching protocols, understanding, you got to be able to do IP subnetting very, very quickly. It is a much more comprehensive exam, in my opinion. And I think that's probably the best way to do that. The best comparison I think you should do is just grab the exam objectives of both of these. You will start to see some overlap, and then all of a sudden the Cisco exam makes this very sharp turn and goes deep into these details. I have the CCENT. I am CCENT certified. It's probably going to expire here shortly. I just haven't updated it or felt a need to. But it's I took that and you need to know plenty of hands-on. You need to configure a Cisco router and a Cisco switch from scratch. You need to understand how to put in all of those command line options. It is a comprehensive exam. So don't get caught thinking that they're similar. There used to be a time when there actually was a good bit of parity between the Network Plus and the CCENT. They were almost identical. I think that was Cisco's idea, was to try to make them identical to pull people away from the Network Plus and get them into the CCENT. But I think what they probably found, this is my thought process of what I'm thinking happened. I have no idea. But what I think they found was that when it came time to now take the next version that gave you the CCNA, they probably found that people didn't know enough to be able to jump into the details of configuring these routers and switches, and it just became too big of an exam on the second side. So that's a very common way to look at doing that. Well, I had fun this week, and let me show you how I had fun this week. I was here at home. I was doing my normal thing. Now, as you can imagine, I do a lot of work on my own site. I'm constantly communicating to my site. There are a number of different ways to communicate to my site. I've got a lot of different front ends to my site from all over the world. I've got a lot of different different ways to communicate back and forth. But one of the things I do is I try to get rid of a lot of the things that are on the outside. I communicate directly to my web server. So obviously, the web server is going to, it's a very important thing for me. The web server always needs to be available. I have built an infrastructure with multiple web servers and load balancers and reverse proxies and multiple devices to at least ensure as much availability as I possibly can, considering the budget that I have. So I go to my computer. I want to do some things on my site, and I type in professormesser.com to go to the forums, and this is what I get. Now, for someone like me, whose entire livelihood relies on that server, this was a showstopper for me. So already the sweating begins. Like, what is going on? What is happening with my server? I have a number of third parties that I use to monitor my server constantly. If anything hiccups on my server, I get a message immediately on my phone, and from multiple places. So I'm always looking at response time that you're seeing. I'm always trying to examine how well the server itself is, the health of the server. It's an important thing. If something's going wrong, my phone knows about it before I do. So when this popped up, I thought, well, this is a big problem then. If I have not already been informed there's an issue and yet I can't get to my server, there's an enormous problem for me. So the real question becomes now, what is going on? What is happening? Now, one of the things I did immediately, because whenever you try to get to a service that's not available on the internet, you notice there's a delay. Trying to get to a server that's not operating properly, or not responding properly, there's a few seconds that goes by, 10 seconds goes by, and then you finally get a message. This message pops up immediately when I typed in my website, hit enter, boom, got a message right back, which told me something was telling my browser, no, you can't get there. No, you can't get there. It's taking too long. How can it take too long to respond, and yet you didn't give it any time to respond? This doesn't even make sense. You waited half a second to tell me that the server took too long to respond. You didn't even give it a chance. So what was happening? The first thing I did, because I'm a network geek, is I brought up Wireshark on this machine, because all of my devices have Wireshark on them, and I did a packet capture. I didn't save the packet capture. I'm so sorry. It was a panic moment. I apologize. But I did a packet capture, and immediately in the packet capture, without doing any type of filtering, I'm noticing some messages come by that say ICMP TTL exceeded, time to live exceeded. Now, for those of you that have been through the Network Plus certification exam, you know that the time to live is an IPv4 setting within the IP packets that decreases every time it goes through a router. So it starts off with a big number, like 64, 255. And it cycles every time it goes through a router. The router decreases it by 1. Oh, your TTL 64, now it's 63, and it sends it on its way. And the next router says, now it's 62, and sends it on its way. If that TTL ever gets to 0, the last router that gets the packet says, your TTL 0, dropping you. You're done. Your entire path that you're going on is over. And the reason we do that is because there's not going to be 64 routers between you and the other side. There's not going to be 32 routers between you and the destination you're going to. Usually the TTL is exceeded because there's a loop on the network. That is the most common thing you'll see. Now, and Renee in the chat room immediately, sounds like a loop. Renee is absolutely right. Renee is on the mind. It's the first thing you think about when you hear TTL is exceeded, is there is a loop on the network. Now, I'm on my internet. Now, to give you some concept, obviously, the network at my house is also connected to the network at my studio, because they're geographically, it's the same place. It's a separate building, but it's right next to my house. I also have a separate subnet for my security system, my cameras. I also have a separate subnet for my audio that's in this room that's right next to me. And I have another separate subnet for the bird feeder network that you've heard me talk about before. So I've got like 5 different subnets running on this network. So the immediately thing I'm thinking, because I just made some updates and changes a day ago, I'm thinking, did I screw up a route in my routing table? But before I started looking into that, what I did was go directly to my cable modem And the cable modem that I have in my studio is one that's pretty intelligent. And I had it run through a trace route. This is going to be very hard for you to see on the screen. So I'm going to zoom up a little. There we go. That should show you. I just ran a trace route to the site I was going to. The thing was that some of my traffic was working fine, but obviously traffic to my website was not. Now you can see on this trace route, the trace route to my website, by the way, usually goes boom, 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 and then 12 or 13 hops later, I'm there and it's finished. So I was expecting it to give me a nice list telling me exactly where it's going to my website. But look at this trace route. You can see the hop number 10 was 162.151.81.105. I'm on a Comcast network. That's a Comcast router. Then nothing happened. I got timeout, 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 which sometimes can happen if ICMP is disabled on a particular device. But I've run this trace route many times, and ICMP is not disabled on this particular network. Then I get 162.151.81.105. Hold on a second. So router at hop 10 was 81.105, and the router at hop 14 was 81.105. Wait a second. Again, timeouts. And then 81.106, and then 81.105. So I'm starting to see duplicates in Route 22. So you can see Route 10, Route 14, Route 18, and Route 22 are the same router. Boy, that's a problem. That's an issue. You never want to see that. You should not be seeing the same route showing up multiple times on a trace route. So I also, since I knew that if I'm running into a looping situation, make this story even longer, I ran a ping. Let's unzoom the ping. There we go. The real important part of the ping. First, I was not getting to my website at all. And I was getting, as you can see, multiple responses to this ping were coming back from a router that was local here in Tallahassee saying time to live exceeded. So I was sending information out to the Comcast network. It was looping around in the Comcast network. Eventually, this router said, you're TTL 0. And it sent an ICMP message back to me that said, hey, dude, I had to drop your stuff, man. Sorry about that. But at least you know about it. Take care. And that was it. So that's why I was getting that response so quickly with my browser that was telling me this site can't be reached because it took too long to respond. The browser's not smart enough to understand that an ICMP TTL response is not taking too long to respond. It would be smarter if the browser actually said, you got a TTL response, that it would examine the ICMP and tell you. But that effectively stopped that particular session, and I got these TTL exceeded. And now what do? Now, the funniest part of this whole thing, that literally took a few minutes to figure out, because you see it happen. You take a quick packet capture. Whoa, TTL time exceeded. And then I took these other things, the pings and the trace routes, so I'd have some evidence of this, because the next step is obviously to call your internet service provider. Now, for those of you that work in networking, you understand this technology, you know that when you're calling into your internet service provider, you're getting the tier 1 person. They had no idea what I was talking about. I said, hi, I'm having a problem with the Comcast infrastructure, with the Comcast routers. There's a loop in the Comcast network. And they said, oh, you're having a problem with your router? No. Well, let's reset it. Like, I'm not having a problem with my router. Router's great. It's not a problem with my router. The problem is actually a message I'm getting from you. It's the Comcast router. They go, yeah, the Comcast router, the one that you have. Like, no. There is a building in town that's got a Comcast on the front of it. And in that building is a router owned by Comcast that a Comcast network technician takes care of. It's broken. And they opened up a ticket. So kind of had to go through this. No, have you tried turning it off and back on again? Let's do that. In fact, the first one I went to, this is how sneaky they are. Just so you know, never trust tier 1 for anything. Because the tier 1 person said, well, the problem's with your router. Let's reboot your router. I said, I know that's what your first step is to reboot the router, but I'm actually getting a very specific message from the Comcast network. So it's not really your router. And then they said, well, actually, I'm not able to communicate with your router right now. Like, what are you talking about? My router is solid. It never goes down. It's in the room next to me. I look at it and all the lights are flashing. She turned off my internet connection. She turned off my internet connection to force me to reboot the router. Like I didn't know what was going on. So I powered off the router, powered it back on. I said, okay, I've powered off the router. I've powered it back on again. And you can turn the internet connection back on now. And then, of course, oh, I'm able to connect to your router now. And she connected to it. I said, okay, we still have the problem. And I said, can we just open a ticket and send it up to tier 2 or tier 3, the network guys? And that was the story. It took about, at that point, I had been down for 3 hours. And I'd already opened up a ticket because I thought it was only on my home side. I came over to the studio. It was happening on the studio. I opened the ticket on the studio side. 30 minutes later, it was fixed. So I have Comcast Business here. And the business accounts have a different set of priorities than the home accounts. But I suspect they were already working on it because I was noticing this ping. This ping started off, the router that was complaining started off complaining in Alabama, which is well north of me. Then it moved to Panama City, which is a little geographically closer. And then finally ended up in one spot in Tallahassee. And then finally ended up here in Tallahassee. So I could tell they were working on it. They were on it. They were trying to get there. But this is a very good example of seeing problems happen on a screen and then trying to figure out what's happening behind the scenes. And if it's something like a time to live exceeded and you're seeing these messages come back from a router, where's it coming from? The ping was a really good way to do it because it would give me the name resolution. I could have just as easily looked at the ICMP response in Wireshark and had it perform the name resolutions in there as well. Very easy to do. But that is a problem you never want to see. There should never be an ICMP time exceeded message on anybody's network ever. And it was nice to talk. I had one person I talked to on the front end, and she said, I've never heard of this problem before. And I said, yes, because you should never see it. This is something that should never, never, never happen. It's not even something that should happen once in a blue moon. It should never happen. And once we kind of went down that road, she was fine. So that's my story of my network outage, the loops that Comcast created inside of their network, and what I did on my side, which was pretty much nothing to be able to fix it because it was not my problem. Well, the good part of that, obviously, is that it really wasn't my problem. Is that the issue was not my routing. I did not break it. I was very happy about that. Someone else broke it. It was not me. Well, let's take some questions in the chat room and take questions on the phone lines. If you want to call in, you're more than welcome to. You can. You don't have to. The number is 855-785-RJ45. If you're calling in on Skype, you put the +1 855, so there's no Skype minutes that you would using. +1 855-785-7545 for those. There was a lot that went into what I've been working on here. So one of the things people are talking about in the chat room as well is the recertification exam that CompTIA has released. And they apparently have only released this for the 900 series exams at the moment. But what CompTIA has done, I think they finally figured out they're losing money on this. They've tried to find, let me spin it the right way. They've tried to find a better way for you, the certified person, to maintain that certification. We used to only deal with continuing education units, or you had to pass a higher level CompTIA exam or third-party exam to renew your existing lower level CompTIA exams. And what CompTIA has realized is that some people just need A+. They don't need a Network Plus. They don't need a higher level exam, or they're not in a position at the moment to get a higher level exam. So one of the things they've started, I'm trying to find out where they stuck it on their website because I don't know if they really stuck it there for their continuing education program. They probably have not put it on their website. They're always slow to put things on their website for some reason. But they have a new exam they've created for A+. This is not for Network Plus at the moment, but they've got a new exam they've created. There it is, the recertification exam. They did stick on their website. I apologize. The recertification exam for A plus means that you can go take a single exam, and that will upgrade you from effectively an 800 series certification to what is effectively a 900 series certification. But they don't put certifications in these buckets. You're just A plus certified. So it's a way to renew your certification without taking the full A plus exam all over again. You can just go in and take one exam that ostensibly is one that deals only with things associated with the 900 series. I guess they do a subset of other skills too, according to what they're saying here. And they do have a set of exam objectives that go through these pieces. I looked through a little bit of it the other day, but it's mobile devices, Windows operating systems, other operating systems, troubleshooting, and operational procedures. I like the idea. It kind of makes sense for those people that just need A+. This, I think, was a good way to fit this in with what they were doing. And maybe we'll see this for Network Plus when Network Plus is updated. Maybe we'll see it for Security Plus when Security Plus is updated. I don't know. And maybe if this works out, they'll just keep doing that. Because I have a lot of people that have a Security Plus exam that talk to me, and they say, I don't need a higher level certification, and I got to get so many CEUs to renew this certification, and I need this cert for my job because a number of organizations require that you have a Security Plus certification. So a recertification exam for Security Plus, I think, is actually more valuable than a recertification exam for A+. But this is a good timing-wise. This was a great time to bring out this now that the 800 series exams, the English language 800 series exams have been retired. So if you want to update, that's the way you do it. Not a bad way to do it, really. I think that's, but of course, what's the cost? I'll tell you if it's good or not. $100. $100 USD, United States dollars, 100. Okay, it's not so bad. So for $100, which is less than paying the 3 years of continuing education maintenance fees, you could renew with this. Okay, that's actually economically a better deal if you know the content already. Otherwise, you're going to have to go back and watch videos with those pieces. I may have to create a subset of videos that's specific to these exam objectives, which I'm sure are identical. Let's see if the exam objectives for the RC093 are available. I'm going to use my Google cheat, and I don't see them currently. Maybe they're out there, and some of you, I'll have to look once we're done with the study group today. Subnetting is on the exam, some of it. For those of you taking Network Plus, you'll notice I don't spend a lot of time in my study groups talking about subnetting because it's such a tiny bit of the exam. It's another example of how the Network Plus and the Cisco exams are so different. Cisco exams are huge on subnetting. Network Plus asks you just a teeniest bit of subnetting. You might get one subnetting question. You might get two. I doubt you get three. Supernetting is on the exam. It is called, in the exam objectives, it's called route aggregation. But it is. I've actually had a route aggregation question for you this month that's now going to have to wait to next month. I didn't think I'd be able to get to it. So if you're planning to attend next month, you want to hone up on your route aggregation skills because I'm going to give you a bunch of routes and you have to give me the aggregated route for all of them. That'll be something to look forward to. That's my tease for next month. But again, it's such a small part of the exam. It's like a one-liner in the exam objectives. So again, a lot of the people that talk about the exam objectives or taking the exam, go to the exam objectives, has everything in there you would need to know. That's where you would also determine how much of this do I need to know. I have a lot of people that will spend weeks and weeks doing subnetting, and then they'll go to the exam and they get one question on it. They're like, I spent weeks on this. Like, yeah, but if you looked at the exam objectives, it's barely mentioned. It's hardly in there. That's what you really have to concentrate on is the amount of this as well with those. So make sure you make a note of that. It becomes very important. Let's find another in the chat room. See how the chat room's doing. Other resources for how to subnet. We've talked a little bit about this before. There's 2 or 3 different methods that people will use to subnet. My recommendations really go to YouTube and find people doing it different ways and find the way that's most comfortable for you. Ultimately, all of the ways are exactly the same thing. They just present them in different ways and have you calculate it in kind of a different way. But ultimately, when you start learning it, you're realizing they're all three doing the same thing. It's just whatever makes sense for what you're doing. I do it the old school way, the traditional way of making everything binary and showing you how the binary calculation works, because I want you to understand what's going on behind the scenes. What I really should do, and it's on my list, is to do a more advanced subnetting series that really goes through subnetting in intricate detail and takes you past the manual binary and into more of an automated power of two calculation, which can help as well. That's where you really would get into these pieces, and knowing subnetting really well. That's a good way to do it. I would say the Network Plus in fact, I would say the Network Plus, the question in the chat room, is the Network Plus more memorization and less critical thinking? I think it's the other way around. I think the latest Network Plus exam is much more critical thinking. It's what's your first step to troubleshoot this? What is the next thing you should do? What is the best next step for resolving this particular problem? I found the latest reports of the Network Plus exam seem to be speaking more towards resolving issues and stepping through a number of tasks rather than simply memorizing different terms. Very useful. There's plenty to know, obviously. There's plenty of memorization because you have to know connector types. You have to know bandwidths. You have to understand the speeds of networks and the different types of network standards, certainly. But there is a practical component to it as well, a very, very significant practical component to it as well. So keep that in mind too. I think you'll run into that. It'd be an issue. In the chat room, there's some folks wanting to talk about split horizon. There's not much to talk about split horizon. It's just a term, another one of those terms you need to know for the exam. It's used when you're doing configuration troubleshooting, especially on wide area network links. For those of you that are familiar with the Network Plus exam, we talk a lot about dynamic routing protocols on the exam. And the dynamic routing protocols work by all of the routers that are on your network. You might have a router in Florida. There might be one in California. There might be one in New York. And there might be all over the place. There might be in Minnesota. There might be some in Colorado. There might be some in Kansas. And all of these routers are, with dynamic routing protocols, are always talking to the router closest to it, the router that's directly connected to it, and saying, hi, I'm in Florida and I know about these routes. I'm connected to New York. Let me tell New York that if you need to get to Florida, you come to me. And these routing updates are generally sent out at very specific times. Sometimes the entire route is sent out at a certain amount of time. Sometimes an update is only sent when something changes. But regardless, it's an automated process. One of the things that it's very common to turn on in your router is to tell your router, if you receive a route from someone else, like from New York, don't tell that back to New York during the routing update. Why would you need to do that? Don't tell New York that the best way to get to New York is to talk to New York. That doesn't make any sense. So split horizon means that you're going to learn all of these routes from many different places, because you could be connected to New York and California at the same time. You're learning all these different routes. But when I send out what I know to everybody and I send the update to New York, don't include New York's update. And when I send the update to California, don't include California's routes. They already know what those are. That's the term that we call split horizon. And you'll find that if you're working in a router configuration, the split horizon may be turned on. It may not be turned on. Usually it's something that we do turn on to prevent loops across the network. It's very commonly done for our wide area network route configurations. And even though we talk a lot about dynamic routing, what you will find is many organizations will simply rely on static routes to avoid a lot of these problems. Now, for a network that's very large and presumably complex, you're probably going to use dynamic routing because it's easier to maintain. But in smaller networks where you can go in and configure the routers yourself and keep up with where all the different sites are, you might just want to do static routing. That makes it very easy. There's no updates. If you need to get to that route, you go that direction. Done. You've already built the story. They know exactly how to get there. Very easy. In the chat room, the recertification exam I mentioned earlier, does that $100 mean for any CompTIA exam? You can recert for $100? No. That is only for, this is brand new this week, this is only for the CompTIA A+ certification exam. The CompTIA A+ recertification exam for continuing education is under the continuing education section under CompTIA A+ recertification on the CompTIA website. And that's only for A+. So it's not for Network Plus, it's not for Security Plus, it's not for anything else on the exam. So that's the way it goes for that. If you're looking to update your Network Plus or Security Plus, you're going to have to use the existing methods, at least currently. Well, let's go to the phones. We've got a call, the 419 area code. Are you there, caller? What's your name?
Hi, this is Richard.
Hey, Richard.
And the question I'm having, or what I'm struggling with, is all of the different parts of where they talk about the 10 base, whatever, and the fiber wire and and how to put these different networks together and all the lengths. And I mean, they put it in the graph, and I guess it's all just kind of confusing. And is there a good way to go about trying to remember this? And is it majorly significant for the exam?
I like your description of 10 base whatever. I think that's probably a pretty good description of the challenge associated with that. This is one of the things that it's kind of a problem on the A+ exam, but it's really a problem on the Network Plus exam, is that there's a lot to memorize and it's hard to put them into perspective if you've never touched a network before. But of course, for the Network Plus exam, many of the people taking the exam don't have a lot of networking experience because this is an entry-level exam. You wouldn't expect people to know a lot. Now, if you look at the CompTIA exam objectives, I think they say it's good for you to have, 6 months or 9 months? They expect you to have some knowledge of networking before you get into this piece, and that would certainly help. But if you were to, for instance, I'm going to bring up on the screen, for instance, there's a cable category, the Ethernet standard that generally is associated with that category, and the maximum distance you would commonly see for those categories. And you can see there's tons of Ethernet standards. In fact, there are tons of Ethernet standards listed in the exam objectives. In fact, it's quite large number of objectives. Let me see if I even have the exam objectives still up. I don't. Do I? I think I might. I do not, but it's the same type of problem, though, that the exam objectives, I do have them, 10 base. So if we were to look at those, it's huge. It's the 10 base T, 100 base T, 1000 base T, 1000 base TX. Now, fortunately, and it goes on and on. Now, fortunately, a lot of these standards, though, you can group together. That's something I tried to do in my videos, because you can group 10 base T, 100 base T, 1000 base T, and 1000 base TX into their own category of twisted pair copper cabling networking. So if you know that those four fit in there, you're in pretty good shape. And you kind of have to do this with all of the different parts of the exam, not just the Ethernet standards, but the wiring standards, the wiring categories, the connector types. There's a lot of memorization on here you have to go through. And I think grouping things together would probably help. If you had a chance to work with the fiber connectors that are listed, it's going to be a slam dunk for you. But I can imagine looking at these fiber connectors for the first time, it's very challenging to try to put the names with the connectors because you have no point of reference. One of the things I like to do, and I recommend people doing this for the A+ exam, is go out and look at the specifications for a computer. So go to Dell's website, go to anybody's website that sells a computer, go to Apple, go to IBM, go anywhere, and look at their computers and drag into the technical details. Kind of get deep down into those technical details of those. What are they wanting for memory? What is the CPU? What is the type of CPU socket used on that device? We can do the same thing with networking equipment. Go to Cisco's website and look at a switch or look at a router. And look at the Ethernet standards that are supported for that. Look at the different fiber connectors for that particular device. Does it use an SFP? Does it use an SFP plus? What type of fiber connects to those? And if you can get some type of perspective as to how these are really used on people's networks, I think it might help a little bit with the memorization process. But ultimately, it's going to be memorization of things you've never touched before. And I can imagine that's always a bit challenging, Richard.
Yeah, that has been challenged.
But just try to apply it back. Just try to apply. It's almost easier for the things that are command line based, because I can pop open a command line on anybody's computer and run a ping and run a trace route, run a dig, run a NS lookup. I can do all of that on anybody's computer. It's those intangibles that get to be a little more of a challenge, and maybe flashcards is the way to go. Maybe it's just a rote memorization for you. So try a combination of practical application and some rote memorization, and maybe the combination of those together will help.
Okay. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Good luck, Richard.
Thanks.
There's a lot to deal with on the exam that is rote memorization. I think a lot of the exam itself is going more of this questions that are performance based and are making you think about troubleshooting to kind of apply those skills. So instead of just asking you, here's a picture, what is this? They do talk more about how would I connect these devices together, and they kind of give you connectors on both sides, which is a little different. When you're applying it yourself and going through, just makes a little more sense in those. A question in the chat room about routing protocols. Every routing protocol in the world is classless, and they are all going to use whatever set of subnet masks fit for that particular network. You often see this when you start doing route aggregation, where you're really just applying exactly the minimum number of bits that you can use to get that to a particular site. So that's why when you're talking about classless subnetting, that is the same thing as CIDR type subnetting. The CIDR type addressing is just a way to write down the same decimal based subnet mask. So for example, 255.255.0.0 is how you traditionally in decimal mode write that out. Well, if you were to use CIDR block notation, it's a /16, but it's exactly the same thing. And it doesn't apply back to any particular IP address range, so it's not class-based. Everything is classless these days. And it doesn't matter what dynamic routing protocol you're using, everything is going to be classless. There's nothing that is not in the last 25, 30 years is anything statically class-based. The way it used to work is you just didn't put a subnet mask. There was an IP address associated with the device, and with class-based subnetting, you knew what the subnet mask was because you defined that based on what the IP address is. Well, that's obviously ridiculous. Just a huge waste of IP addresses that way. We don't do anything that way these days. There's always an IP address, and there's always a subnet mask, and the subnet mask can be anything that we want it to be. It doesn't have to fit into a very specific definition of those things. I suspect your question is asking about something different, though. And the way that it operates. But if it is, just let me know in the chat room. That's a way to send those through. Whenever I start getting into a lot of other pieces of this, the Network Plus exam, I think you need a number of different things. You need a good book. You need to watch the videos. Try those. Get as much Q&A as possible. I think questions and answers get you in the mode of looking for those questions. They need to be good quality questions and answers, because you need something that kind of gives you the same feel as the multiple choice part of the CompTIA exam. I think another good thing to do is to do these things: practical, hands-on application. If you were to build an IPsec tunnel between two sites, then you become very familiar with really what's going on under the surface. In fact, you almost learn more than you would ever need to know for your Network Plus exam. But now you've got it. Now you understand exactly what's happening. You've set up your phase 1 and your phase 2. You understand exactly the parameters that you use to put it in there. It builds the tunnel. You sent traffic across the tunnel and back, and everything's working the way you would expect. That's a great way to learn. So if you're trying to learn those standards or wireless, those types of things, it makes perfect sense. Isn't the Mike Myers CompTIA Network Plus by McGraw-Hill my book? No, I am not Mike Myers. That was easy. Give me more questions like that one. I can shoot through those very quickly and make a lot of rapid sense with those. I didn't write a book. Makes it even easier for Network Plus. In fact, what I did was the folks at GTS Learning gave me their book. I used their book to make the videos. And then when I got the videos done, they stuck QR codes in their book that matched back to the videos. So if you want to say my book, that's not really my book. Someone else wrote it. They did all the hard work. All they did was stick my QR codes in there. They were nice enough to let me use the book materials to make the videos. But if you go to the Network Plus index, the link to the book is right there at the top of the page. I should put some other things in there to get those. In the future, would I write a book? Nope. I am not going to write a book. I have, at least not the traditional kind of book you might think about. I have released recently the Q&A guide for A+. So there's a 700 question 22901 book that's out now. There's going to be another very large A+ Q&A book that's coming out. But that's probably where I'm going to stop with the books. I also published books before. Published an MMAP book before. It's just incredibly time consuming. And I don't like it. You should do what you like. That's what I say. You should absolutely do what you enjoy. And I can't say that I super enjoy writing a book. Not my thing. I prefer making videos for you and doing live streams like this instead of writing the book and make that happen. Let's go to the calls. Let's go to the caller. 727 area code. Are you really in Florida, caller? What's your name?
Yes, sir. My name is Drew.
Hey, Drew. Welcome.
Thank you. I've taken a course through government training in Tampa, and I have quite a few years of experience under my belt with networking, and I was wondering what is the easiest way recommended for studying with Net Plus. I feel confident enough to take it, but I don't understand why I read on YouTube or see on some of these training videos that there's also simulation.
There is, and that's the real catch.
Questions.
The real catch is this, what they call performance-based questions. So on the exam, you're going to get through traditional multiple choice questions. That's something you commonly see in most certification exams. They're going to give you a huge chunk of these questions. Ultimately, you'll get a maximum of, I think, 90 questions for the Network Plus exam, and a very large percentage of these will be multiple choice questions. But right at the beginning of the exam, they're going to give you, they won't tell you how many. It's a smattering. It's somewhere between 1 and some people have gotten 5. Sometimes people get more than that, but usually less than 10. What they call performance-based questions. And these performance-based questions can be fill in the blank. They could be matching. They could give you a particular device and tell you to connect it to the network in a certain way. They could tell you to type something in, like at the command line, and perform a particular function. So you're right. It's not something that's simply memorizing terms and putting them into the exam. They may ask you to actually do something. And that doing of something may have a direct applicability to what a network administrator may need to do to troubleshoot a problem. So you kind of do have to know how to use a ping and a trace route and an NS lookup and all of those other command line functions in the exam objectives. Or you may really do need to understand how to read through a firewall access list, for example. They may want you to piece together those things. Now, they're not going to ask you, here's a Cisco router, configure it, but they may ask you questions about what you have on the screen that you should be able to recognize based on what's in the Network Plus exam objectives. What I commonly recommend to people when they take the exam is to actually skip the first set of those. Just go. You can always come back to them on the Network Plus exam. On any of the CompTIA exams, you can always move back and forth between the questions. They don't lock you into this linear form that doesn't allow you to go backwards. You can jump around as much as you want. So what I usually will tell people as a tip is skip over the performance-based questions at the beginning, get through as many of the multiple choices as possible, and then come back to them at the end. And the reason I do that's a couple. One is to get as much as the bulk of the exam done at immediately, because that's going to be probably the most number of questions is going to be your multiple choice. Secondly, the multiple choice questions are going to jog your memory about things that you're going to be able to use on the performance-based questions, which will help you then get through the performance-based questions faster. So I think the most effective way to deal with those is, of course, know what's in the exam objectives before you walk into the room, but then skip over them, get as much knowledge and kind of settle down into the room, and then finally come back to the performance-based questions near the end of the exam. If for nothing else, to kind of give you a hint on what to do, I think it's a probably good way to manage your time properly, because you're able to get through the performance-based questions faster if you leave them for last. At least that's the way it works in my brain. It may work that way with yours as well.
Would you also recommend doing a brain dump when you walk into the room on your scratch paper, for your subnetting, for your IP addressing, anything you can remember for your wiring, all that good stuff?
That is an excellent thing to do. And it's important for me to bring this up too, because I got a couple of reports in over the last month or so about writing things down. So when you walk into the exam center, they're going to give you, and these days they don't give you paper and pencil anymore. They give you effectively either a whiteboard, a small personal whiteboard, or they give you an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that has been laminated, and they give you a whiteboard marker. Now, in the place I go to locally to take exams, they give me some big fat marker like I'm ready to create a poster for a football game. I have no idea why they do this, because you can't write any level of detail on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with this big fat marker. What I actually do, I've mentioned this on the study groups before, is I buy a very thin erasable marker, one that's got a very fine point on it, and I take that in with me, and I let them know at the front desk, I brought my own erasable marker. Here it is. You can look at it. There's nothing, illegal about that. I haven't written anything on it. There's nothing cheating that's going on there. Can I just use this one? They go, oh, sure. Yeah. Because then I can write very specifically with a very fine point as much as I want on that paper. One of the things that I heard recently, and I want to bring this up now that you've mentioned this, is that someone said they wouldn't allow them to write anything on the paper before they started the exam. And that actually may have been some confusion, I think, about the exam process, because there's a couple of steps you go to. When you arrive for the exam and you walk into the room, the exam administrator has to log into your machine, select the exam you're taking, and then click go to have you begin the process. But the first section on the exam, the first thing you have to do actually isn't the exam at all. It's a list of the candidate agreement that you must first agree to. The candidate agreement is big. You can go to the CompTIA website or search for CompTIA candidate agreement. It's a nice long contract you have to agree to. It's effectively the non-disclosure, which says you're not going to talk about anything you're about to see on this exam, and you have to digitally click OK or sign it to say, yes, I agree with that particular statement. So what I tell people is they give you about 15 minutes, if I recall, to read through this. There's actually a clock that's counting down. That's 15 minutes that you can read through this so that you really understand what you're agreeing to. And what I tell people is read it before you go so that you know what's on the candidate agreement. Use that 15 minutes to write on your whiteboard. That's the time to take everything you know about subnetting, all of what's a private address versus a public address, all of the different components of the IPsec that you want to remember, everything that you want to get out of your brain. That's the time you'll put it on the sheet of paper. So it's 15 minutes. Is it 30? Some people are saying 30. I can't imagine they give you 30, but maybe it is. But they give you an amount of time. So that's the time to spend, because they aren't going to, the person managing the test, they should not be standing over you at that point saying, no, click, go, click, click, click. You got to go. Start the exam. Start the clock running. And if they want to stand there while you're writing on the sheet of paper, that's fine. And if they ask you to go, you can say, no, I'm reading the candidate agreement right now. Well, as soon as I finish reading the candidate agreement in 15 minutes, I will click go. And at that point, you're able to write everything down. I think that's a great idea, and you should absolutely do that. But don't get through the candidate agreement and start the exam, because now the clock is ticking and you're spending all your time writing on the sheet of paper when you should be taking the exam. Don't get caught there, and make sure that they aren't forcing you into that situation. You should have plenty of time to write down whatever it is you'd like.
Well, thank you. Your tutorials have been brought up in class. So some of them do a wonderful job explaining out when it comes to the wireless and the networking, the IP addressing. So I've been watching some of those, and then the material that's been handed to us. And then I've also come across something, I guess, only for Windows. I'm learning to play with Linux, and I want to get more towards security and things towards CEH. But it's a lot of learning, and I'm trying to figure out the best way as an IT to bring up my own study habits so that I can delve deep into these things and troubleshoot and use them effectively without having to do a brain dump and realize on site, what I should have done this, I should have done that, I couldn't have done this, and you just become frustrated. And when you take a test, some people are good test takers, some are not good test takers. That's why I brought up the writing it down, because you're saying there's a lot of memorization.
It is, and one of the things I always think about when I think about certification exams is the certification exam is a starting point. It's not something that proves that you know everything there is to know about a particular subject. It's something that proves that you know at least this much about the particular subject. One thing that has been a constant throughout my networking and network security career is you never will learn everything. There is always something you don't know. You will get very used to saying, I have no idea. Let me go find out. Every meeting I ever went to in my last position, which was a network security position with a very new technology that nobody had ever seen before, including the people that were building it, we were learning as we went. We were creating brand new ways in brand new methods and technologies with network security. So of course we had to learn all of that, but then you get into all these other components about networking and dynamic routing protocols and IPsec tunnels and routing tables and route aggregations and plugging into networks and not messing up everything else that's on the network. You know, all of those things all work together. If you're getting into network security, learn as much as you can about networking. Most of network security has this enormous foundation of networking behind it, because you need to understand how to plug in a router, how to do the layer 3 routing, how to perform network address translation, how to do these dynamic routing protocols. A huge ton of what you're doing is the network piece, just so you can finally get to the security piece. I think you're absolutely on the right track with what you're doing. Get the network stuff in and get as much practical experience as you can. Some of it's going to be on the job, because there's no way you're going to be able to simulate a 50-node OSPF network in your house. I guess you could with some of the Cisco tools these days that they finally made free. Cisco's simulator is now something that anyone can use without being part of the Network Academy or whatever they call their training service. That is a great way to start playing around with technologies that you don't have physical access to, but now you can start connecting networks together, switches together, routers together. You can put virtual workstations on the screen, ping from one side to the other. It's a great way to start building networks without having any equipment that you would ever touch. And by the way, for most people that are administering networks, they aren't anywhere near their physical devices anyway. Everything they're doing is from a terminal screen. So it makes perfect sense to be able to use some of these virtualization technologies to do exactly the same thing. And maybe that can give you some ideas about how to implement these technologies and use them without having any physical equipment.
Wonderful. Thank you for your time, sir.
Good luck to you, sir.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, it is. I noticed that the other day that Cisco had changed their licensing on those products. I'm going to find this webpage now. I'm going to try to find this webpage now. It's always about trying for me and finding those pieces on their Network Academy piece. All right. Let's go to back to the chat room. What did I miss? Yeah, that was a weird story, wasn't it, about someone not allowing someone to write down things onto the sheet of paper? I would have been a little bit upset about that on that piece. That was not what I want to do, and go through those pieces. Okay, let's see what the Cisco, see if I can find the licensing for the Cisco stuff. Here we go. Packet Tracer. Packet Tracer 7.0 is available, and they give it to you right now. Just hunt for Packet Tracer on the Cisco website, and they just let you have it now. This is all new. This is something that changed in the last month or so. Is Packet Tracer. They have a version for Windows. They have a version for Linux. The mobile is okay. It's an okay version, 2.0. Stick with the Windows and the Linux. There is no Mac version, alas. But if you've got emulation on your, of course you have emulation on your Mac because of Windows. Run the Windows version. It's a very good version. Grab that 64-bit version if you're running, or 32-bit if you're running. Probably your VM may even be running 32-bit, so get the right version. That's a great way to emulate what's happening on the network. And I'm so pleased that Cisco did this. I was actually not expecting that for Cisco to do that. It's something that they had never, ever, ever, ever done. And I think it's perfect timing. It's now something anybody can use. You can build a bunch of routers and switches and devices, start performing tests through the network. It's beautiful. It's a little out of scope for Network Plus. It's a lot out of scope for Network Plus, but if you're getting into the Cisco side of things, it's a great jump start, and it can help you learn some of these things on the pieces. So, some people in the chat room talking about writing things down before the actual exam. I wouldn't even mention it. I wouldn't even. You've got 15 minutes to sit there and read through the candidate agreement. That's your time. That's it right there. Don't get into a conversation with the folks at the testing center because they don't know. They don't understand a lot of the intricacies with CompTIA's requirements of what's allowed and what's not. You don't get blank papers. They give you one sheet, and that's what you get. And it's erasable. You don't get paper anymore. So don't ask them if you're allowed to do it. They don't know. They might even tell you, no, you're not. Of course not. When of course you absolutely are. So they don't know. It's not in the terms and agreement. You are using the time that has been allocated to you to read through the CompTIA candidate agreement. What you do with that time is completely up to you and not within the purview of anybody at the testing center, which is my point with those. So let's go through exam objectives. More questions on the exam objectives. Did I leave up the exam objectives? Or did I not? Sure I did. In getting through all of those pieces. There is a ton of material in the exam objectives that is specific to, in the chat room they're asking about this, implementing a basic network. So here's the set of objectives right here. List of requirements, device types, environmental limitations, equipment limitations. So what they're saying is the implementation of a basic network, they want to know, here's a set of requirements. What do you need to think about when putting together a network? They're not asking you to put a Cisco router in place and configure it. That's not what this is. And in my videos, I step through each one of these requirements and what you should be thinking about when somebody says, oh, we don't have a closet. We just stick it in the back room where there's no air conditioning. Or we have a network that we have a small room, so we want wireless. Well, is that going to work or not? You know, those are the types of considerations they're really asking about. That may be the best way even go about looking at those requirements is on that piece and going through them. It is, best thing I can do is point you to the videos. I think there's, this is part of the exam objectives also that's a little bit vague. The exam objectives don't tell you down to the specifics of what you need to know. They give you a very broad and in some cases very specific setting, but there's some sections that don't. And what I found is that anytime they're talking about something very, very specific in the exam objectives, they really mean this level of detail. But when they're talking about things that are more generic or generalized, like section 1.12, what I found is they're really asking for more of a generalized understanding. So I think if you know that, the video wasn't vague at all. The video is very specific to these exam objectives. They are built exactly to these parameters. You notice they didn't say implement a basic networks, and they say device types and requirements. It didn't say configure a switch from scratch, configure a router from the very beginning, interconnect multiple routers and use static routing or dynamic routing. They didn't put any of those level of detail in here. You should not either. If you stick to the exam objectives and again, you learn everything that's in the exam objectives, you will easily pass your exam. Don't read more into this than what's there. Don't waste your time reading more into it unless you really want to. If you got the time and you really want to dive into running some advanced configurations and plug-in devices or use the Cisco tools with Packet Tracer to do all this, be my guest. Absolutely do that if you have the interest and the time. But that's going to be well outside the scope of the exam. Well outside the scope of the exam. So that's one of the things. CompTIA, for the N10006 Network Plus, it was just released last year. You're not going to see a retirement date announcement for that for at least a couple of years. So you got plenty of time. Probably end of 2017, beginning of 2018, you'll hear about when it will be retired. And even then, they're going to give you 6 to 9 months of overlap. So you've got plenty of time to take the Network Plus in its current form. If you're watching in July of 2016, that still applies. So you should always check the dates. At the beginning of my study groups, I always give you that date, and that's why. So you know when this version was released, and they should be able to just count 3. 3 years from that date is probably when you'll see the next release, and at that point, there's probably a 6-month overlap. That's how they've traditionally done it in the past anyway with those pieces. And I think that's a good way to look at it anyway with those. It's probably the best way to look at that. That way you know you're not going to run up. There was, as many of you know, the A+ exam was just retired. We just, at least the English language version of the 220.801 and the 220.802 was retired at the end of June. It's gone. And there were a lot of people that were working up to the very last minute to try to get that version of the exam in. Many people were able to beat the deadline. Many people did not. It's disheartening to know that people were really trying to get both exams done. They got one exam finished and then couldn't get the second one done. Now they have to start all the way over. Now, obviously, you don't have that concern with Network Plus. It's just a single exam. But I would hate for you to be rushing up to a certain point when what I have found over the years is that Network Plus does not change as much as A+ does. As I talked about earlier, networking technologies don't tend to fade away as fast as operating systems do. So you tend to keep the networking technologies around for a very long time. And you also don't have a lot of new networking technologies coming out in a 3-year period. It's not like there's a new version of Linux and Mac OS and Microsoft Windows suddenly released. You really might have 1 or 2 new networking topics to put in there. Sometimes these are bigger networking topics like virtualization, but generally we aren't talking about massive changes on the scale that you'd see with the A+. So don't worry so much about when the exam is retired. Just worry about knowing the content. Even if tomorrow they released a new version of the exam, it's going to be very easy for you to pick up what you know and put it into the new exam. That's not going to, for Network Plus, not a problem at all. You're not going to have a problem. I'd be very surprised if it was dramatically different than what we're currently doing right now, because networking just never makes those kinds of dramatic changes, at least not in the scale that A+ does. Put that disclaimer in there. Well, we've gotten through a couple of hours. My voice can tell when we're hitting hour number 2, and I think that probably makes for a perfect time to close out the study group for today. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you for the time with the A+. Thank you for all your calls and the questions in the chat rooms. Hopefully this has given you some ideas of things you can use over the next month. Of course, you can always send me an email. At the top or the bottom of the website is a Contact Us link where you can always send me a note or a question or something you'd like to do on a study group. I'm in the chat room very often on the website, which is available on ProfessorMesser.com 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can always go in there and ask a question. Even if I'm not there, the very knowledgeable people that are there will often point you in the right direction. Sometimes they won't, but most of the time they will. They're very good about that. So I want to thank them for their participation as well. And we will see you next month in the study group. Don't forget to register online at ProfessorMesser.com so I can send you those updates every month. And we will see you in August for the next Network Plus study group. And if you're joining us next week, at this time on Wednesday will be the Security Plus study group. Maybe we'll see you then as well. Until then, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Network Plus study group. Thanks, everyone.